So the work is the inner work. What can we change internally? What beliefs can we look at? What attitudes? Look at our past. What can we change internally to change our external world? Taking control of the controllable.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today I am joined by Daniel Tindall, and I met him a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, through the recommendation of another podcast guest, Gus. And Daniel is a mindset and menswork coach. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It honestly is a privilege to have you here because I really want to talk to you about so much today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this. Yeah.
No problem. So I think the first thing that I really want to, I mentioned the word menswork. Mm-hmm. And I think that although I know what it is, you know what it is, and it's such an important part of what I strive to be, what exactly is menswork? Let's give a clear definition for the listeners.
Yeah, so men's work is about men supporting one another to do the work. So the work is the inner work. What can we change internally? What beliefs can we look at? What attitudes? Look at our past. What can we change internally to change our external world? Taking control of the controllable. So that's the work. Men's work is about men supporting men to do that and creating the environment in which we can all do that together to be better men.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you do is it's invaluable, really, because for so long, something like self-development has been a massive part of my life for such a long time. And, you know, when I met you and I messaged you on Instagram as well, I think that I found that the work seems to be kind of, it's easier. I don't know whether I'll be very careful with my language here because I don't want to come across as judgy or outcasting any people. But I do tend to find that when it comes to the majority of people that are into self-development tend to be females. And I think that I've bonded with lots of people, females specifically, because they have been doing more work like introspectively. And I think that's probably a societal thing. I think men as a whole, you know, we're kind of like, right, just crack on. And I very much had a belief system that, you know, if I couldn't do anything about it, like there was no point worrying about it, or there's no point even thinking and reflecting on it, you know, at all. So I just kind of like blocking off any what air quotes negative emotions, you know, grief, sadness. And I know they're not negative emotions, but that was my viewpoint. So stuff with the men's circle, stuff with the retreats and the one-to-one stuff, I think is incredible. So how did you get into that?
So my journey, I guess, started, I was a personal trainer. So I started off getting into mindset development first. And that came from being a personal trainer and getting frustrated that I was a lot younger when I was doing a personal training, and I was getting frustrated that people were paying me good money to achieve results. Yeah. A large majority of them were just there turning up, but not doing the work in the rest of their lives. And eventually I sussed out, because I was a really fat kid. I was obese when growing up, and then something clicked. I was like, this isn't me. This isn't how I want to be. I'm going to do something about it. A year later, I completely changed my physique, dropped like 4.5 stone, became an athlete, martial artist. I was like, well, I did that on my own. So why are these people not? They're coming to me for my knowledge and expertise, yet they're not implementing that. And then I sort of cottoned on that it's all about mindset. They didn't really believe that they could change. They didn't really want to. There were lots of limiting beliefs and societal pressures that meant they weren't taking this stuff on board. So I was like, so before even I can help them change their physique, I need to change their mindset into a growth mindset. So the two different types of mindset: fixed means this is how intelligent I am. This is my level of capability. I'm not going to push myself outside that, because if I fail, it reaffirms that I'm not intelligent, courageous enough, good enough. Whereas a growth mindset will take any opportunity to learn, and that means stepping out of your comfort zone. If I fail, great, where are the lessons? Because I'm going to learn from them and come back better, bigger, stronger. So yeah, developing that growth mindset is kind of fundamental to life.
I love that. And I think that I completely agree. What I find interesting is, what was that moment for you? You said that you just suddenly decided, like, I'm going to change. I need to, this isn't who I am. Why did that come about? Because for me, I don't know if I've always had a growth mindset, but I think I've always been involved in competitive sports at a very high level. So when I was a kid, I would be, busy on a daily basis. I'd be doing hours and hours of sport. I represented Great Britain really young for gymnastics, trampolining, American football. So for me, I don't know whether I would say that it was a growth mindset, but I definitely had like the underpinnings of, I recognized that if something was challenging and I worked hard towards it, I would achieve it. And then I guess the self-esteem came from that. So what was that kind of Kickstarter for you?
I think a combination of things. I grew up, my granddad loved martial arts, and we used to stay up late watching Bruce Lee movies, all the old ones, Jackie Chan.
Yeah.
So I loved martial arts, and I had a passion for that, a passion for moving. And I grew up in the countryside. I loved being outdoors and stuff. And then there was a point between like poor mental health and stuff that I gained weight, and then I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. And then there's that, hang on, and I saw people around me. I saw like guys getting the girls. I wasn't confident enough to chase the girls because I was fat, felt crap about myself. And yeah, that was that. This isn't who I want to be. I look in the mirror, I'm big. That's not me. That's not who I felt inside. And in terms of growth mindset, like, I've realized that my dad installed that in me. Very, very lucky. He's a sort of did well with himself in business, and he's always brought me up with, whatever you want to do, you can do it. Just that self-belief that whatever it is, you work hard and you can achieve it. So I kind of had that belief, and once that sort of realization clicked, I was like, actually, no, have a word with yourself, Daniel. Like, this isn't who you want to be. Let's do something about it. So that then I just clicked and found the knowledge and applied myself to it.
I think that's a really, really good thing that you had there. There's a question that sprang to my mind as you were talking, was, do you think growth mindset is something that you can develop? Is it, this is like kind of like the age old, is it nature versus nurture kind of thing? What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think it's something you can develop. Absolutely. It's not something that's taught to us, really. Like, in schooling system is designed to make worker bees, and you're put into your classes very quickly. You do these assessment tests. If you don't do very well, you're in like the bottom class, and then that leads to like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you might not think you're very good at English or maths or anything like that. But the reality is, if you apply yourself, you get the right tutoring, you learn in a way that supports you, whether you're visual, audio, all these different learning ways of learning, you can. And of course, I don't really believe in limits. Certainly there's better ways of applying your time. If you're really like, what's it, flogging a dead horse, you can pivot and find something that may align better for you. But yeah, you can absolutely develop a growth mindset. And I think it's a misconception as well that you either have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. You can have a growth mindset in some areas of your life and not others. Like, for myself personally, I know if I apply myself to any martial art or any really sport, because I've always been very good at sport and adapted quite well. I may not be the best at any sport, but I can pick up a bat or ball or whatever it is, and within long, I'll be all right. I won't be bad. So that, cool, great, growth mindset. I can apply myself with that. But when it came to technology and stuff, I was like, I'm just no good at that. Can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, and actually it's something I'm developing, is stop using those words. And I'm like, oh, I've got a fixed mindset when it comes to technology. No, that's a limiting belief. That's stopping me from doing stuff I need to do to achieve my goals. So it's then trying to learn and apply a growth mindset there, and just having that awareness of where you're saying I'm no good or I can't. It's I can't yet, but I can if I apply.
I loved that. I think it was the second men's circle that I went to, and we were talking about, language, and it's something that I've always been mindful with in some regards to how I communicate with others. But when I've communicated with myself internally, I guess from a sporting background, I've been my worst critic. I've been very harsh, very callous. If I can't do something, like, I should be able to do it. But why should I? If I've never done something, like, there's no reason as to why you should be good at anything. And just continuing what you said there about language, I thought that was a really interesting point that you made when you were talking about it's almost like an affirmation. It's almost like it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I do positive affirmations. I do things like that. So it's bizarre to me that in one sense, in one regard, you can be, I don't want to say awake or, woke or anything like that, but you can be aware, can't you? But then just be completely ignorant in one end. So it's interesting, because I do think, I agree, I think it's a spectrum as opposed to I have a growth or a fixed. So that was really interesting to touch on. I think as well, what I'd love to dive into is toxic masculinity, because for me, I think even society has got to this point now where I believe that I'll talk from a personal perspective. I almost had to kind of carefully describe the men's circle for some internal reasoning I'm not quite aware of yet. But I kind of thought, well, I don't want people to think that I'm just going to this like men's circle group and we're just like, a bunch of lads all just doing like toxic stuff and just, trying to be like men. And it's interesting that I think a lot of people feel that way. So let's talk toxic masculinity. What exactly is it? How can we avoid it? And what can we do to go away from that area?
So toxic masculinity is like an unhealthy attachment to sort of archaic definitions of being a man, like toughness, aggression, being emotionally callous, certainly suppressing anything feminine, emotions, compassion, empathy, homosexuality. All of these things are part of toxic masculinity, and you can see that in the way people behave and what language people use. And there's a lot of it in society. I think growing up, certainly a lot of young men, they get their socialization through sports generally, and then when they're a bit older, they go to the pub. And these are kind of breeding grounds for toxic masculinity, and not being able to talk about serious stuff, talk about feelings, talk about emotions, because again, that's the stuff that should be suppressed. What we should be talking about is how tough we are, how many birds we've banged, slagging off anyone, just all of this sort of really peacocking bravado BS, really. And that's, it's trying to
bullshit, isn't it, really?
That's it. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's also having like power and money as the main meaning in life. That ties into that, because then that doesn't account for any other meaning or purpose that actually adds value to other people's lives.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, you know, again, although I didn't really frequent the pubs that often as a youngster, but I did, you know, I did have that really competitive upbringing. You know, so there was, you know, when you fall over and hurt yourself or whatever, it's just kind of get up, get back on it. And it's not necessarily, it's weird for me, you know, without, you know, playing a violin, like I didn't really have a good role model growing up, you know, for positive masculinity. And, you know, there was no real guidance or advice. So I had to figure out a lot of stuff, and obviously got a lot of stuff wrong, and will continue to do so. But I think it's interesting because even now, when we're, you know, hundreds of years down the line, like we still, I mean, I said something in the circle about, I feel like there's a massive disconnect. The more we've become technologically advanced, the less attuned we've been with ourselves, because there's some sort of this egoic sense of, you know, we're better than we've ever been. And I think that we've lost the ability to just check in with ourselves and be, you know, like, how are we as individuals, not necessarily even just as a collective, but, you know, are we checking in? Are we accepting feelings? Are they acceptable to accept? Because like I said to you, for me personally, for a long time, stress, like I said, I just wasn't so, like, I am a very laid back person, but I also didn't actually accept the feeling of stress. I didn't actually accept the feelings like of anger. For me, that was experience, but it was like, it's a very healthy emotion to have. Obviously, the way you express it determines whether it's a healthy thing or not. But, you know, anger is one state of being. You know, it lets you know that something is unjust or wrong, or, you know, whatever it might be. Now, how you choose to act is another thing. And I think that for me, as soon as I found out about the group, I loved the idea, because I thought, you know what, like, I don't have that positive role model, that influence. So getting together with a group of guys that are all working towards the end goal of being better on a day-to-day basis, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, just appealed to me so wholeheartedly and massively.
Yeah, it's really important, because it's important to tackle it in several aspects. All right, we've got toxic masculinity that we need to tackle, because men are just who feel the need to chase these stereotypes and these traits and project them. They're not being true to themselves. They're not being authentic. They're trying to live up to a idea that isn't serving them ultimately. And this leads down to bad mental health problems. You know, suicide rates for men are extortionately high. And then, of course, abuse against other people. It lashes out when you bottle and suppress these emotions. They lash out. You know, we've got violence against women, and just unhealthy behavior. This is mental health stigma, because it's not, you know, in the toxic sense, it's not manly to feel your emotions or to admit you've got emotions. You've just got to be a robot. But invariably in society, especially as we've got a big drink culture, where does it come out? Well, it comes out when people get drunk. They'll burst into tears or they'll start fighting. I used to work doors, used to see it all the time. You know, it's sort of that lack of acknowledging. And a big reason for it is, well, there's several things. Like we don't have a ritual process to take young boys into manhood. There's not, we just don't have it anymore. And we'd probably have to look back hundreds and hundreds of years to find a ritual process. You still have it in some religions, but largely across the board, but certainly in Western society, we've lost that. So therefore, young boys don't really, you kind of just stumble and fumble into manhood. I mean, if you're a team sport, maybe you're a part of a rugby team, drinking beer out of another man's butt crack is probably about as ritualistic as you're going to get. You know, it's not showing a healthy role model of being a man. So there's that aspect of lack of rituals and guidance, right? Like absent fathers, both physically absent from our lives, but also emotionally absent, because they're either working or they haven't been taught how to be good fathers, good role models, good men. And the generations go back. And the other thing is patriarchy. I think there's a huge thing sort of against masculinity at the moment, and actually healthy masculinity is really needed. Yes, the toxic stuff we want to get away with, but we can't just bundle it up into one terminology, and masculinity is bad, because it's not. But patriarchy has damaged men and continues to damage men, because it only serves the very few at the top. Yes, the very few at the top are men, but that doesn't mean all men are bad. It means they're profiting off everyone else's pain. So patriarchy has suppressed the feminine, and that's feminine in female bodies, in females, as also the feminine in us, which is emotions, feelings, creativity, anything like that is normally, and certainly in the toxic sense and in patriarchy, has been shunned and suppressed.
So you mentioned there, and it's been, we've spoken on this podcast to a couple of different people, Gus being one, Victoria being another, and they spoke on, kind of touched on it. What I would love is for you to kind of give a brief overview of what the divine masculine is and what the divine feminine is.
Yeah, so like getting into men's work and understanding, for me to get, when I got into this, I had to understand a lot more about masculinity, because I realized there's this gap between there's a gap and a reason why mental health is so bad, especially for men. And then understanding that where men fit in the modern world, where hunter gatherer are not titles that are really needed, more provider, as equality's coming in more and more, rightly so, but it leaves a lot of men lost. So that got me looking into sort of masculinity. Well, what is it to be a man? What does a man look like? If we're not out getting the food or earning the money, well, where's our role? And I do think that's a big reason why a lot of men find themselves lost or threatened. So that got me into looking into masculinity and divine masculine and divine feminine. So these are energies, right? Energies that we all possess, both men, women, and anyone else. If you're in a body, you'll have masculine and feminine energy. And they have certain traits connected with them. So the divine masculine is about centeredness, direction, order, strength, and reliance. It's like driven and higher purpose. So the divine masculine is very purposeful. So we talk about purpose a lot. It's thrown around a lot, but it's about serving something more than yourself. That could be God, or that could be society. That could even be your family, but something that's more meaningful than just a self-serving life. So that's the divine masculine. Provides structure and awareness. So the divine feminine, on the other hand, is way more flowy energy, way more chaotic, all about feelings and life and emotions and compassion, creativity, artistic. And yeah, really like the life force of the feeling and that connectedness. So they say the sort of divine masculine is the conscious awareness. So in Hindu tradition, you have Shiva, who's divine masculine, is like the supreme meditator, the awareness. He gives structure for his counterpart Shakti, and she's the life force energy. That energy is flowing, it's all over the place, and he provides the structure to contain the energy of the feminine, also the awareness to appreciate and acknowledge this life. And you see it in Chinese traditions, in yin and yang. So if you don't resonate with the masculine and feminine, you've got these other energies or ways of describing them. So you've got yin and yang, and you have obviously the famous sphere with the black and white and the black and white dots within them. Again, that difference in energies, dark and light, water and fire. And especially the yin and yang's a beautiful way of looking at it, because you can see it as a whole and then how they work in synergy. And it's about looking at that balance and understanding how they work. And they work in a way that's it's called dynamic equilibrium. So when one gets bigger, the other one retracts, and then they'll come back into balance, or you can work them back into balance. But if I, for instance, if I really needed to be decisive over something, for instance, say if my house was being threatened and I need to defend it, then I'm going to go really into my yang energy, and my compassion and kindness is going out the window. It's like I'm filling with yang now because I need to fight and protect my realm, protect my home. So the yin goes down, the yang expands. Cool, I can fight, do that, great, come back, then rebalance. And so we see that in different religions. Many religions have looked at the divine masculine and feminine.
And again, it goes back to what I was saying, thousands of years ago, it blows my mind that we just kind of had this understanding of ourselves that's so much more complex and detailed than we do now. And for myself, I've always been a very, very logical thinker, very, very not emotionless, but I would think my way out of situations. If I had a problem, I would make sure that I did all the research, I'd learn, I'd understand. Cool, that'll never happen again. Or whatever the situation was, that was my go-to mechanism. It was, I'm going to learn. I never really sat and just accepted that, okay, cool, that was really upsetting, and I never sat with the pain. I never sat and meditated with it, felt it, moved on from it. So when you're talking about the masculine, the feminine, the yin, the yang, we're not actually talking about males, females. This is a spectrum, right? This is something that goes on inside each and every one of us. How do we balance that? How do we access those? If you are someone that is a bit more towards the masculine side of things, and you approach everything with a logic and very thoughtful and stoic, I guess, approach, how do you start to tap into that more emotional side? How do you start to access that? Because that's a scary thing.
Yeah, it is. I often forget, like, now I'm in this work and now I lead these men's circles, and I'm so used to this work now, I forget how I was at the beginning of this journey, when the thought of opening up and talking about emotions, like, I've just spent the last 10 years pretending that I'm not sensitive by fighting in a cage. Like, no, not talking about my emotions, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's things we can do, right? Mindset. Firstly, we need to come back to mindset. We can do something about this growth mindset. So straight away, we need to approach it with an attitude and belief that we can make a change. And balance is really important with men. So often in society, because of toxic masculinity, men need to balance their feminine energy a lot more. But also what we're seeing as well is a lot of females, because now there's a sort of tendency for women to be very career driven. And I'm not saying this is rightly or wrongly, but a lot of the career drive structure, everything that's needed to be successful in most careers is masculine energy. So there's a lot of women who need to balance their feminine again and come back into balance with that, just as there's a lot of women who need to up their masculinity a little bit so they can set boundaries. So for men, it's definitely touching into that feminine, allowing emotions in, and you can do that in different ways. Awareness is the first step. Great, we're aware of these energies. I'm aware that I need to feel a little bit more. It's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be strange, I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy it, but I know I need to do it, so I'm going to do it, having that mindset. And then there's different things in terms of bringing in more feminine energy. Talking is a great one, and sitting and feeling. So meditating is good, although a very masculine trait, but it's allowing, instead of clearing your mind, allowing emotions in, finding what's going on and sitting with the emotions, allowing them in instead of rejecting them and pushing them away and being like, no, it's fine. It's interesting with Stoicism and Buddhism. They have kind of very similar attitudes almost, but I find a big difference is compassion. There's a lot more compassion in Buddhism. So there's a lot more understanding there. There's a lot more empathy. There's a lot more compassion. The result is the same. You've got to accept. You can control what you can control, but the rest of it, you accept it and you carry on. But I find, from my interpretation and understanding, that the difference is compassion. So I find Buddhist teachings very valuable for accessing compassion, accessing the feminine energy, as well with the good balance of sort of structure from the masculine. Stuff like listening to music, dancing, like being creative, drawing, artwork, anything like that is tapping into that feminine expressive energy. So it's allowing space for that.
I started to, for anyone just listening, I started to smile and almost laugh in that, because as soon as you mentioned about the dancing, the image in my head just blew up of a school disco.
Yeah.
How funny. Like I just literally suddenly thought it's like the perfect representation of masculine and feminine energy. You've got guys either just stood around running about, skidding on their knees and like punching each other, whatever they're like, we're doing, TIG. And then you've got the females, the girls, they're all dancing, like, expressing themselves. And then some of the guys, I used to dance as a kid, but like nobody in my school knew, because I was kind of so worried about the judgment of that. Like I used to do ballet, I used to do tap, so this was another one of those things that it was a string to my bow, and I was just so busy with this like lifestyle of sport and dance and stuff. But I remember thinking like, I really want to go dance, but then there was like all the boys were like over in the corner, not doing anything, just laughing, having a little a jolly, and like I said, running around like skidding on their knees. So I thought that was really interesting when you mentioned that, actually, because it's something that I've not thought about, but very, very true. And no one sets those boundaries. It's such a weird thing. And from my understanding of psychology, I don't think it's even necessarily what's said, but it's what's necessarily unsaid, because we want to be accepted by the tribe, right? So I think doing something that goes outside the norm, it's a risk.
Yeah, definitely. And then and all those boys would have learned that behavior, or learned what's cool or what's not cool, what's masculine, not masculine, from their fathers if they're around, or media. They will have learned from society.
Yeah,
perpetuates.
So the other thing, leading on from psychology, I absolutely love. It's one of my biggest passions. I love reading about psychology, and probably just because, like I said, it's my main kind of go-to, the logical side of analytical side of my brain. That's probably why, because the interest stems from, why do I want to figure everything out? Why do I want to get control of it, of everything, to make sure that, you know, whether it's hurt, success, whatever. You mentioned something in the men's circle, and it's kind of the pattern of every or the introduction, about Carl Jung's archetypes. And I would love to go into a bit of detail on that, because it was very fascinating, and I think it would be very applicable for a lot of people.
Yeah, so the archetypes are fascinating, and they provide a really nice framework for us to develop and mature as men. I'm still learning a lot about them. I'm by no means an expert, but it's really interesting. Every time I look at them, every time I read more on them, there's like another layer or another perspective. So the archetypes I use at the men's circles are based on Robert Moore's book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and his work's based off Carl Jung's work. And archetypes are like he describes them as like an energy that we can tap into. So Carl Jung believes these archetypes are ingrained in all of humans, in our unconscious, and that's through everyone, all of humanity. So it's kind of like animals have instincts. So if a little baby duck hatches, it will imprint on the nearest, hopefully mama duck, but if they're not available, you or anyone. So that's an instinct. But he says that these archetypes have been through humanity since humans evolved, because you see them all coming up time and time again through stories and through history. So yeah, the more I learn about them, the more they're really fascinating, and they're really powerful tools for us to develop and navigate. Because the great thing about, yes, we want to work on ourselves, right? But we want to make sure we're going in the right direction. Because as we know, growth isn't linear. We're going to go up, we're going to go down, we're going to fall off a cliff and hopefully scramble back up again. It's part of the journey. So the archetypes have their main archetype in their fullness. So they're mature. This is the archetype and the main energy we want to tap into and access. So if I go into them a little bit, we've got the warrior, which I've tapped into a lot of in my suppression of my sensitivity and my lover archetype. I've tapped into the warrior by learning how to fight. But the warrior's skillful, disciplined. For me, like everything martial arts teaches, defending boundaries, really important. But that's not just physically, that is emotionally. That is when it stops us from taking advantage of, right? It's learning to say no, and then reinforcing that if we need to, and having the awareness to do that. Drive, the warrior is driven, and he serves a higher purpose. And he's the creative destroyer, which means he can destroy stuff, but that's only to make way for better things. It's not just needlessly destroying stuff for the sheer hell of it and enjoyment. So the warrior is that really fiery energy, and I link it to the fire element. They also have the ability to be emotionally detached. So a healthy, well-rounded warrior archetype can, as I mentioned earlier, sort of suppress the feminine emotions, kindness and compassion if they're needing to carry out a task for the overall good, and be a warrior and be a soldier in the sort of very literal physical sense. They can detach emotionally for the sole benefit of achieving the higher purpose. And the warriors are very mindful, very decisive and intentional with its actions. So that's the warrior in its fullness. With all of these, there's a shadow aspects, and we can touch on that afterwards.
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great.
Because it's really interesting. That's where the tools get really, really, really good. So the magician next is about gathering knowledge. The magician is a storyteller, so gathers knowledge, tells stories to impart this and spread this wisdom. The alchemizer of life. So this is basically, the magician has a growth mindset. He will turn the bad situations in life into good by taking the lessons, taking the gold and the silver lining out of those, of all the bad stuff, and turning it into wisdom. He's reflective. He is a very skilled meditator, really concerned about balancing and understanding his internal world with his external world. Because a lot of what I teach with growth mindset links into this. If you can control the controllables, and ultimately what we can control is how we think and feel and how we understand. So by reflecting and looking at ourselves internally, we can change our external world, whether that be by the things we attract, but the situations we're in, because we've changed ourselves. So that's the magician. Clarity of thinking, spiritual meditator, master of technology. So any say profession that really needs skills, like scientists, lawyers, like even a car mechanic who knows that engine inside out. It's the magician archetype there, that knowledge. And magicians will then take on apprentices and teach and pass down. Again, overall, the same with the warrior is the archetypes in their fullness serve something more than themselves. Again, whether that be humanity, a higher power, God, a king, whatever, but they serve a higher purpose. They're not self-serving. The next one, the lover. So the lover archetype may be one that's more suppressed in men. It's very much more in the feminine energy. So it's compassionate, kindness, empathy. It's the lover in terms of, yes, with your partner, but also like loving father, loving brother, loving nature. It's sensual, so connected to the senses. So enjoys life, enjoys food, enjoys music, enjoys dance, enjoys being creative. So creative and artistic are traits of the lover archetype. Again, sort of in service and not self-serving, because if we're self-serving, that can lead to some of the shadow aspects. Lastly, the king. So the king archetype is kind of embodies all of them, but with an overlay of centeredness and wisdom. So the king archetype is in service of something more than himself. He's not there just to be the king and lord above everyone else. He wants everyone to flourish. So he's very generative. He wants things to grow and will encourage that. He's like the protector of his realm. So what he does is draws on the other archetypes as and when he needs them. So he's the protector of his realm. How does he protect the realm? Well, he uses his wisdom from the magician, and then uses his the warrior boundary setting to extend or defend his boundaries as and when he needs them. He's the provider, so he provides for his realm and everything. And this is, we can talk about our realm, but our realm could be our family unit. It might just be us. It's our immediate vicinity. It's our community though as well. And providing, making sure people can flourish, trying to build people up. And the king is the archetype that we want to get closest to. because he's the one that can draw on the other three. He's the one that's wise, mature. He is the divine masculine ultimately. And it's really what they say, Robert Moore says in his book, is that we want to treat these archetypes, and especially like the king energy, as energy. We can't ego attach to them. We can't identify. You can't go around saying, yeah, I'm a king, I'm the king, I'm identifying as a king. Although I might do, I don't know. But no, we can't identify as the king. We want to be embodying the king energy as and when we can. We want to get as close to it as possible. But if we then get too close and identify as the king, that's when our ego is taken over and become more self-serving, self-righteous, and care too much about ourselves.
So how do we, I mean, I've already mentioned that previous to, it's funny because previous to learning about psychology and learning about these archetypes, the base level of knowledge that I have, and you know, go into therapy and those sorts of things, I thought I was quite, you know, self-aware. I think, self-aware is the word I'll use. And I thought I'd kind of figured out a lot of shit in my life, because when it came to, like I said, you know, if it was business, if it was a personal problem, research. So for me, when you started describing those archetypes the first session, and you were describing the wizard, I was like, oh, like that's really funny actually, because I'd never heard of this. I'd heard of Carl Jung's archetypes, but I had no understanding of it, so I was ignorant to what it was. But it was interesting when you started to describe it, because for me, I think I was very blocked off from certain elements of the warrior, certain elements of the lover, and was very much my kind of first thought process was, right, how do we like figure this out? So I guess what where I'm going with this is, where do we move? So if there's an initial first thought, you know, it could be, let's say it's anger. How do we kind of know if we're just running to the warrior or running straight to the love? How do we embody, as you say, the king that draws on all of the opinions of the other three and then makes a self-led decision?
Yeah, good question. Awareness first. Like, the more we learn about these archetypes, the more awareness we'll have on where they impact our life, and where we may be acting more in one archetype than the other, or even a breakdown from there in their shadow aspects. So awareness, and how do we become aware? We have to reflect. So bring in stuff like mindfulness into our lives. Journaling is really powerful, this stuff, you know, write these, learn about them, look at the qualities, and then write out how you're in every different situation, you might be, again, in these different archetypes. So we need to understand, so we need to educate ourselves and have the knowledge that we can have the awareness, but then we need to be able to implement that and relate that to ourselves. So we need to be mindful, so we can meditate. We can have focused meditation on certain aspects, where it's more of a contemplation rather than meditation. But journaling's powerful for this kind of stuff. And then we can see, it's been really honest with where we are. We can talk, if we have someone who we trust, who knows us fairly well, we can bounce ideas off and just check in with people and say, look, this is how I think, where I'm at. Would you agree? Would you not? We've got to bear in mind that everyone they're viewing things from their own perspective. So we can use them as a tool, but it's not the only tool. Our self-reflection is really important, because it's all about how we feel and view ourselves anyway. And then we can write lists. We can write this stuff down. and really try and unpick and assess, and generally just become very mindful on how we act in different situations. Because there's certainly times when I am, for instance, I'll give you an example here. What's been really interesting for me is setting boundaries. So in my personal relationship, I'm trying to set a boundary, which is healthy. Setting boundaries is healthy. It's something very important to learn. But if you're, say, in the passive shadow, so there's the shadow of all of these archetypes that is kind of passive, kind of self-inflicting, the pains inflicted on ourselves, right? So if you're generally in that passive shadow and you need to set more boundaries because you have none, you want to go to the fullness and go up. And they describe it in a triangle, like a pyramid. You've got the two, the positive and negative shadows either side of the bottom, and the fullness at the top. You want to get to the fullness, but so often, like a pendulum, doesn't swing from one side and lands in the middle. We overshoot it. So I've noticed sometimes within setting boundaries, I accidentally overshoot it and become a bit too much the other side. The bipolar or shadows of the warrior is the sadist and the masochist. The masochist is the passive shadow. The sadist, inflicting pain on other people, is the positive shadow. But with awareness, I'm trying to set my boundary. Okay, I might have overstepped the mark and defended it a bit too much, and now actually I've caused some pain to my partner. Not physical pain, emotional pain. I'm going to make that very clear. But then I'm like, because I've got the awareness, then I'm like, then I have a conversation there. I'm like, I'm really sorry, darling. Like I'm trying to learn how to instate my boundaries, but without overstepping that. Feedback. You know, you're then applying these things, but because I've got awareness of these bipolar aspects, and they're called bipolar because they're on the same. When you're in the shadow of these archetypes, it's a sliding scale, as we've mentioned, as with pretty much anything in life, right? We want to be. The problem is if you're in the shadow, you'll slide from one side to the other. We need to bring awareness to our shadow aspects, develop them so we can become the embodied, the full version of each of these archetypes.
So what are the shadows of the other? So we mentioned the
testing me now.
Yeah, we mentioned the warrior. So we've got the shadows of the king, the lover, and the wizard.
Yeah, so lover is the addict in positive pole, and the impotent lover in the negative. So briefly, like the addict's just in this, because the lover's sensual, the addict loves any senses and gets addicted to everything. So vices, whether that be food, drink, porn, women, like anything that can be felt, it's addicted, always looking for something more to solve their lacking of their feeling of restlessness, lack of boundaries as well, lack of structure. They don't have any structure, therefore they just flitter between one thing and the next trying to chase. Whereas the impotent has too much structure, very, very dull, very grey, depressed, that kind of feeling, doesn't really feel life. So they're those two. For the lover, magician is the innocent and denying one in the passive shadow. So wants the responsibility, wants the title, of the magician, but doesn't want the responsibility, doesn't want to put in the work to gain the knowledge to get the title.
Okay.
And that's the denying innocent one. The one that I find interesting about that is the denying innocent one hides hostility behind naivety.
Okay.
So passive aggression, when someone's being passive, and this is really used, and if you having awareness of the stuff, you can see how it happens in society. People who are manipulative And then when called out by someone's warrior energy saying, hey, you're doing this, they're like, oh, no, I wasn't doing that. Oh, they completely act naive to the whole situation.
Just like the whole passive aggressive joke.
Yeah, massively. But that disarms the warrior, because then the warrior's not really got someone who can go at if they're denying responsibility. And then the other side of the magician is the detached manipulator, who will manipulate people, give them knowledge, but not all of the knowledge. So they have to keep coming back to them, keep feeding them little nuggets, but never giving them the whole picture, or purposely withdrawing certain knowledge to cause them harm. Can be cruel. A hair splitter, someone who will, I remember being at a Body Power Expo, and I think it was Phil Lerney seminar. And there was someone in the audience just started hair splitting, put his hand up for something, and everyone was like, oh, shut up. Why? Because he wanted the title of the magician. He wanted to be up there doing his thing. So he can't be up there. So instead, I'm going to sit here, split hairs, and try and show my knowledge. So that's how that, and we can see that a lot, certainly in the fitness industry and most industries. And they're the armchair adventurers. So they're people who sit back, keyboard warriors, will criticize other people, be cruel, try and break people down. Why? Because they're not doing it themselves. You see it a lot, mixed martial arts, because I follow a lot of mixed martial arts. You get all the armchair critics who are like criticizing them, slagging them off, and they probably wouldn't have the balls to step in, let alone on the mats, but into the cage in their life. So that's that magician, those bipolar shadows. And then the king, we have the abdicator and the tyrant. So the abdicator shuns responsibility. Okay, doesn't want to step up into his fullness, doesn't want the responsibility, and in fact he projects king qualities onto other people. Oh, that person will be much better suited for the task. That person will lead. Okay. And it's from a feeling of insecurity and not feeling worthy to lead. And then we have the tyrant, on the other hand, who lords power over others, who breaks other people down. They see everyone as threats, really. So they're either seeing people as threats and breaking them down, or they're putting people in their place. It's kind of the difference between being confident and arrogant. The difference is how you make other people feel and how you go about doing it. If you break other people down, you get arrogant. And that's so that one is a really interesting, obviously, because we want to be in our king energy as often as possible. I've been to a few workshops on this, and it's interesting that abdicator is more the role that most men relate to most. They find it harder to be in their tyrant, whereas some people are just tyrannical by nature, and they enjoy being in their tyrant. They enjoy putting other people down and elevating themselves above. And one thing that I've read today, which I want to share, is that which was really interesting, just to articulate that, is if you scratch a tyrant, and you'll find a weakling, an abdicator, but if you pressure a weakling, you'll find a tyrant. So this speaks to how you can flip between one and the other. And this might be, I laugh at this because this is like, I relate more to the abdicator and have done. So I'm much more embodied in my king energy now than I ever have. But I know that still I'm like the warrior king, but in his shadows sometimes. So if keep pushing me, I'm nice, I'm not going to set my boundaries, I'm being too nice. Oh, you've pushed me, and instead of stating my boundaries verbally, I want to use my martial art experience to instate them. I've gone straight over to the tyrant. I've been pressured, too nice, not enough boundaries. Oh, now I want to punch you.
Yeah.
And that's part of my journey, is to, before I get to that stage, is healthily step into my warrior in his fullness and my king in his fullness and say, this isn't acceptable. these are my boundaries,
Mm.
and basically this is where the line is. If you cross it again, I'm going to reinforce it. And instead of getting physical with it, because there's no need for that, if you keep pushing these boundaries, you're just out of my life. Boom. Like, set my boundary healthily, done. Not accepting it, great, out the life you go. And that's how we can implement and use this knowledge, this awareness of the different archetypes to really fine tune our self-development, our journey into being better, more well-rounded men.
No, I love that. And it was fascinating when you first described it. So it was really good to go into the active and passive. So you mentioned about being within those elements, like embodying them. How do you come out of the shadow into the light with the awareness? What is it that you're looking for? So you mentioned, the king, you're either, a tyrant, and I've forgotten what the other one is, but it escapes me. But
or weakling.
Yeah. So you're either one end of the spectrum. What work do you need to do to climb that pyramid, to get up to that top, to make sure that you're not just sliding across that scale from one end to the other?
Yeah. It comes down to awareness a lot, and radical responsibility and honesty. Because if you're not taking responsibility for your life, then you're not going to change. If you're not honest with yourself, you're not going to change. And a big thing that I've seen with clients and with men is that feeling of a higher service, a higher purpose, something more than just yourself. Because if you're not here for making life better, making the world better, making families better, anything else other than yourself, you're probably going to be quite happy flittering in your shadows, because who cares? It's just, it's a lot of all of these kings, all of these archetypes in the fullness is serving a higher purpose, right? And the commonality between all the shadows is that they're all self-serving. And a lot of it comes down to feelings of self-worth as well. So developing self-worth, self-love, because the shadows are all, even tyrants. This is the thing, like a tyrant, the only reason he's a tyrant is because he's got a deep-seated undervalue of himself, but he's overcompensating by bringing everyone else down. Someone who's mature, embodied in their king energy, doesn't want to break others down, because he's centered and loves himself enough and accepts other people enough not to need to bring other people down. He'll build them up. But it's that underlying lack of self-worth and self-love that makes him a tyrant, because he can't take other people doing better than him. He can't take any feelings of judgment. And if you scratch beneath the surface, he's just an abdicator who's gone too far the other way. He's just in that shadow. So stuff like, as I said, the journaling, self-awareness, therapy, men's circles, like talking, educating yourself. The books, Robert Moore's book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, big place to start. And just understanding more where you're at on your journey, and having full acceptance, and having a growth mindset. And this is a big thing as well, is having a growth mindset. Don't be afraid to be wrong, or to realize you need to work on yourself in a certain area. But it's then through development and acknowledging and understanding where you need to tweak. And then we look for activities or therapies in certain areas to nurture some of these qualities. Because if we understand what the quality is of a full embodied king, full embodied warrior, magician and lover, and we're honest and reflective, then we can see what we need to generate and nurture ourselves.
I definitely agree. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's, at least my understanding of everything is, and through therapy and the own self-development work that I've done, is there's a time and place for everything. Like nothing is inherently unhealthy, because there are going to be times where you are going to need to, like, if we're keeping with the archetypes, jump into warrior energy and potentially protect loved ones. That there is going to be that time. There are going to be, as much as no one, we would not like to, I'm not going to promote violence or anything like that, but there could be times in your life that you are going to need to jump to that. You are going to need to protect yourself, sometimes physically, sometimes more in establishing boundaries. And I think that something that got me for a long time is the ideology that only certain things were like a healthy expression, So I think in that shadow work, I was more leaning towards, the abdicator, if we're talking about the king, because I was like, I don't want to, like, my view of kind of, taking authority was controlling. It was manipulative. These were my kind of, I guess that was my belief system. People that did that were, self-serving. They were, all of these kind of traits. So I never really wanted to be that, because I was like, well, but then there is a time and a place for absolutely everything. And I think it's just about learning, growing, doing the work, and, journaling and figuring out, are you too accepting? Do you struggle to set boundaries? Because as you said earlier, boundaries are, from my own personal experience, and they are very, very healthy, as long as they're healthily laid down. Everybody has their own boundaries, and they're perfectly acceptable. And it's just down to the individuals in your life whether they accept them or not. Whether they're reasonable is another question. And we've discussed in the men's circle about, sometimes people, partners, friends, family, they're not necessarily going to understand. But I think you eloquently put it, and if I misquote you, please jump in. Where you said that you don't necessarily need to understand, but you do need to accept that is a boundary for me.
Yeah, accept and allow. So communication, we can try and get to understanding, but some people, as with life, we all understand to the extent of our experiences and knowledge. Some people will not understand, but if they love you, they will accept and allow you to instate a boundary. And that's really important. And what you say about the boundaries and drawing on these archetypes, and the main thing is, yes, nothing necessarily is unhealthy if you're in the fullness, if you're serving and from a place of maturity. For instance, boundary setting and getting into your warrior archetype is absolutely, I'm a massive believer in it. And the thing we've got to navigate now in society is that the fact that anger is just deemed as a complete bad thing, and that can't even be discussed. Again, it's this masculinity, it's almost this toxic femininity that's attacking masculinity and causing more damage. What we need to do is be able to defend our boundaries, but do it with a understanding and compassion and wisdom, or else we'll become a sadist and hurting people for the sheer hell of it. But in our fullness, we can. I'm a big believer of, it's interesting with men's work, and going, once some people go really far into men's work, they become really way more in their pacifist lover archetype, almost feminine energy. It's like it swings the other way almost. So I'm a big believer in what I try to do at the men's circles is really make them scented. They'll be nice, scented with fire, centered. If you ever come to my men's circles, you'll understand my my words escape me sometimes. But one of my sort of slogans for my business, make ready, like to make ready is to be prepared, whatever that is. In my case, is mindset. And it's make ready men. So men, be prepared. Be prepared for what? Anything. So my little slogan thing is leading with love. We've always got to lead with love. So for me, that is our higher purpose, right? If you don't believe in God, fine. If you don't believe in anything else other than love, lead with it. Like, lead with love in your heart. What I'm doing, serving love. So you can physically set a boundary and reinforce a boundary in your warrior archetype for love, i.e. you're in your home, someone's coming in, you love your family, you love life, you love your own life, someone's coming in and attacking you. What are you going to do? You're going to draw on that warrior and you want to attack back. And what's reasonable force? We won't get into that, but the warrior, full, I love my family that much. Am I willing to die for it? Yes. Get me stuck in. Leading with love. Potentially doing something very violent, but is it necessary? Absolutely, because you are protecting your family, you're protecting your realm. That is a loving thing to do. But then if we look at leading as a king, am I being loving? Am I leading with love? Because if I'm in my tyrant, no. If I'm an abdicator, I'm not stepping up, when actually I could probably do it better, but my lack of self-worth is feeling, no, I'm not stepping up. Then I'm not leading with love, because I'm not loving people. I'm not loving society. I'm not loving my family. I'm not loving everything that I come across enough to step up and take the responsibility of being king, of being in that energy and taking leadership when I am more than capable of being able to do so, but I'm allowing my own lack of self-worth get in the way. And the second part of that is lead with love, but always make ready. Make ready what? Make ready our mindset, make ready our bodies, look after our health. Look after all of this stuff we're talking about, our internal world. Because if we're not looking after that, we're not coming with our best selves. And it will manifest in toxic ways. It will manifest in negative ways. It will impact our personal relationships, our work life, our society. And it's all this stuff we can do to really, and it's a never ending journey, the work. It's just, I always laugh, like when I'm doing, like I've been doing mixed martial arts or martial arts of some form for like 16 years now. And I've done a lot of different disciplines and fought a few times. And the more I do it, the more I realize I've got more to learn. You know, the more progress I make, the more I'm like, oh man, this journey is like endless. There's so much to learn.
Yeah, that resonates with me on such a high level with pretty much everything. Self-development specifically, psychology massively so, because every time you learn something, you're like, yeah, and Gus said it, the circle, and I think a lot of people that, you know, it's ignorance is so bliss. You know, you think you've got everything figured out, and then you learn something and you're like, oh, well, that's actually changed my whole perception on me, life, the way that I do things, everything, the way I form attachments, relationships. And the more you learn, there's almost this, for me anyway, this tendency to feel like I'm still so uneducated or dumb, whatever language you want to use. There's still so much more to unpack, uncover, and it is an endless process, you know, because each time you learn something, you'll apply it, you'll deal with certain things better. You might pendulum over to the other side and deal with some things worse. But then the more you learn, again, those things, it's just little adjustments as you meander through life, I guess. And I think, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, and having the humbleness and humility to understand that there is always more to learn, and you can learn from everyone.
That's been a big one with these podcasts as well, because in my everyday life, I'm a coach myself, so I'm normally, how do I describe this? I don't want to say telling people what to do. I'm normally the educator. So, but it's been brilliant to have these discussions on the podcast, because they're areas of my interest. You know, selfishly, the podcast for me is so self-serving in the way that I'm talking about lots of things that I'm passionate about and I'm really interested in. But the overarching reason behind the podcast is the education. You know, I want to help instill a growth mindset. I want to take people's hand as an introduction to, there's many ways into this realm. And these are the kind of people that kind of have done it. This is the kind of route you can take. If you don't like it, cool, there's this route as well, but whatever interests you. But it's been really interesting just listening. And I think that what I would love to talk about now is, we've spoken so much about men's work and mentioned the men's circle, is let's break it down. Like, what is the men's circle? What's the layout? Let's talk details about how you help to instill this men's work into people.
Yeah. So the men's circle is just, it's providing a space where men can get together, and there's different layers to it. And so men's circle is like a men's circle. There's lots of different men's circles, different men run them, and they'll have their own formats. I've developed mine over the last 8 months or so, which has been a really beautiful journey. And as you can imagine, like, there can be this, we're just men talking around a fire, but it's not as easy as that, because men have big egos. Generally, we all have our egos, and everyone thinks this and that, and especially like the masculine thing is telling each other, fixing. We want to find problems and want to fix it, so we want to tell each other how to fix it and where they're going wrong and what they do, and it's not always beneficial, and it can be quite damaging. So it's really providing a space where men can connect, but in more of a mature way. So as we mentioned earlier, pubs and sporting places are not really the places to talk about your emotions without being made fun of and having lots of banter chucked at you. There's a time and place, but generally you're not going to open up about life properly. It's going to be very superficial chit chat. So men's circles are a place where you can truly connect. They're sober for a start, connecting with other men in a sober environment. So you are conscious, you are aware. And so the big sort of fundamental element is being able to share. Okay, so I would open up the space in a bit of a ceremony ritual, welcoming and acknowledging these archetypes and their elements and stuff, and bringing in a bit of the psychology and spiritual to it, because it does give context and structure, and it's bringing in that ritual. We have a meditation to ground us down and bring us really present. But the main thing is about sharing. Okay, so it's providing space for men to just unload and express what they've got going on. And it can be whatever's going on. Like, you don't have to dig deep and get all the emotional stuff out. You can just have a check-in and be like, I've been working on this in my business, or got this going on at work, or this going on, whatever. It's like, it's whatever you need to get off your chest. But it is a space where you can really dive deep and say, look, I'm struggling with this. Because so often we don't need advice. We just having that, just being seen and heard by other men and held like that, and just like held in this space and being able to voice, I'm struggling with this. It releases the burden because you've voiced it. And so often I find there is a burden in being a man. And part of that is keeping your shit together for the rest of your family, for you and your partner, whatever it is. That's part of being the divine masculine, that pillar of strength and light for people to rely on. It comes with being, there's a certain amount of stoicism that comes there. And although, yes, we should be able to, and I encourage people holding space into their relationship so that they can talk. Sometimes we can't, and sometimes we just need to vent and get stuff off our chest, and this is the space to do it. We provide that space. And, you know, if you've got stuff you're grieving over, you're welcome. You're welcome to share that. If you're angry about stuff, you're welcome to share that. If you're joyous about stuff, you're welcome to share that. You know, it's about having the space to be able to tap into this stuff and share. And it's a space where you don't have to, if you just don't feel like sharing, you don't have to share. Because so often we sit there and listen to other men's stories and learn from that, also find understanding and acceptance. Because what we then find is that although all our problems are packaged differently in our own lives, but there's a commonality between them. We might have experienced it at some time in the past, or it might be something we're dealing with now, or probably going to deal with at a later date. You know, we understand that connection between all of us. And that's the brilliant thing about sharing. And it's also learning to hold space, which is a really powerful tool. It's really helped my ability to be very present and listen. And I know the feedback from a lot of the men is like, oh, I've started to listen more to people. So often we're waiting for the conversation, and we're just waiting for a pause so we can say, here's a story that's related to this, or here's my opinion, or we over talk and we just can't wait to control the conversation. And that's not what it's about. It's about keeping this quiet and just allowing that person to express themselves in whatever way they want or not. But it's providing that space, which is really important and something we don't get in society.
I think as well, just to clearly define holding space, one of the rules that you set whilst people are sharing for however long that they're sharing is you clearly ask them to, no one says anything while someone else is talking. The person talking also has to acknowledge that they're finished by saying, you know, thank you for listening. And I think that those things are incredible, really, really good tools, because it isn't something that you get in society. For me, when someone's telling me a problem, I really have to check myself, because although it comes from a place of care and affection and I'm trying to help, when you do offer advice, especially unsolicited, it's so dismissive to how someone's feeling or their situation. Because, you know, if you take it to a polar extreme and someone's like, you know, I'm so down and depressed, it's the same as basically saying, well, have you tried not being? You know, it's so dismissive to how someone's feeling. And the problem is, with my kind of natural go-to of being the logical, analytical, I'm instantly, someone tells me a problem, I'm like, well, this could help them. It's, you know, I have to really check myself, even as a coach, because I'm like, well, meditation would be great for this person. Journaling would be great for this person, rather than just keeping my mouth shut, listening, obviously being present with them, showing that empathy, that care. And I think it's a really great tool. And it was the first experience I had of that, well, besides therapy, was the men's circle, you know, and listening to the other guys sharing whatever it was that they were talking about. You said at the start was like, just don't think about what you want to say. Now that was difficult for me, really difficult. And it's a skill that I'm working on, because I have such an ADHD style brain where like lots of things are firing in, like ideas to add to the conversation, where the conversation could go, what I want to say, rather than just being present and listening to that individual. And the podcast has helped massively for this, because a lot of the time, when I first started, I was really focused on the conversation and the direction and where things would go, whereas, and I didn't want to lose what I thought was a good like question or something that would add to the conversation. But also what I've found is when I've just been present with it, the conversation has just been so much better. It's flowed, because I've allowed that person to truly vocalize what they want to in a way that they want to, and it's effortless and it's not rigid. So how do, if someone isn't in an environment of the men's circle therapy, how can they hold space? You know, how can they hold space for partners, friends, family?
Yeah, so you can implement this in your lives, but it takes an understanding on both parties. So it's having the conversation beforehand of certainly when you're getting into tackling difficult subjects that you think this may end in an argument. It's saying, I need you to hold space for me now. So what's holding space? It means you're attentively listening. You're not trying to counteract their argument. You're understanding what's going on for them. And it's just being really present, being really aware. Having awareness of yourself when things are coming up in your own head. And just trying to understand that they're expressing from a point of themselves. It's also like trying to focus again, and the person who's sharing to focus on what they're feeling. So if I'm sharing, I'm focusing on my feelings and what's going on for me. Even if it's related, say, if I'm talking to my partner, I'm not going to be saying, you should do this, you should do that. It's like, by your actions, it makes me feel like this. And that way we take ownership of our own reactions, our own emotions. Is a bit less triggering. And I'm able to express what's going on for me and not projecting what I think is going on. And just having that, right, holding space. Can you hold space for me right now? Doing that. And then basically the other person not responding straight away. And does it even need a response? I'm learning a lot in my personal relationship with my partner of keeping my mouth shut and holding space, because she'll talk to me about stuff and like she's emotional or wants to rant about something, and I have to keep catching myself. I'm like, I'm getting better at it now. It's like, do you want me to respond, or did you just want to be seen and heard? And she's like, no, I just want to be seen and heard. Cool. Especially when you look more into the energies, the feminine wants to be seen and heard. That's it. Like, so often they want to be seen and heard, witnessed. They don't want the masculine. Men like solutions, problems to fix, and we like solutions and structure, and here's a plan of action. Great. Feminine doesn't really like that, doesn't really need it. They just want, I'm going to make this little container and make a safe environment so you can express. I'm not going to react negatively, or I'm not going to take offense to any of it. I'm just going to create this space. So that's like in that dynamic, but certainly with any dynamic, holding space is a really powerful tool, because then we can put ourselves in a place of compassion and trying to understand instead of trying to fix, trying to respond. It also gives space for, if we're triggered by what they've said, to sit on that and understand that why it's triggered me. I don't need to respond. It's creating that space. So the difference between like responding and reacting is that knee jerk. You've said something that offends me or has triggered me, and here's my reply. Whereas if we're holding space for one another, we can sit with it and then question, do I need to respond? Do I really need that? Or do I just need to go away and reflect on what is brought up for me? There might then need to be a conversation that's had. But I always try and look at, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? Does it need to be said by me?
So with your personal relationship, would you kind of end, like, so if it's a difficult conversation, would you end that like line of speech in the same way that we would in the men's circle, and say, thank you for listening, and you've not just taken a long pause?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space. And it's really key not to set the boundary of, we're not responding straight away. Because it kind of defeats the object of sharing. And it's been funny with the men's circles as they've developed, because men coming into a men's circle kind of want advice as well. And it is a beautiful thing having men together who are on their paths and have a certain degree of awareness and experience. So you're like, okay, this might be a good group of men to get advice from. But what actually happened was people were projecting a lot. And the advice was, you should do this, you shouldn't do it, or you shouldn't do this. And people were just being triggered and offended. So I've just taken that out, because actually it's not part of that process that's so needed. We actually can learn and get people's advice, but just from listening on their own experiences instead of being told what to do. And it's kind of similar in that personal relationships, is just allow the space. We don't need to respond. Cool, they've voiced that. There might be, again, something at a later date, but don't react now. Sit with it.
No, I love that. So I know that another thing that you've done quite recently is the retreat, the men's retreat. And I know that you were really busy prepping that, a couple of weeks ago. How did that look? What was the layout of that?
It looked very busy. we crammed in a lot for 2 days. So we did, it went really well. I greeted the men we got a place up in North Yorkshire, so in the beautiful countryside. As often as possible, we connect with nature. My men's circles currently are all outside around a fire. I will be expanding into indoor environment just to make it more accessible for some people, but as often as not, like, we want to be going into nature. So greeted people into the space. We opened the weekend with a ceremony, outlining intentions for the weekend, mindful language. Like, these spaces that I try and create, whether it's men's circles, retreats, are spaces where it's a chance to step away from what's normal in society, or what our normal is, and try and elevate ourselves from everything from intention to speech. Okay, so it's been really mindful, and I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for an awareness and for an intent that we're going to try and elevate ourselves for this few hours in a men's circles, or for this weekend at the retreat. So we open up the space with this intention, outlining what's going ahead and welcoming the different energies, archetypes, and things we're going to be working with. The Friday night we did I took a workshop on breaking down these archetypes and going really deep into the shadow aspects as well, and the divine masculine. Basically what we've talked about in this, but in a more in-depth workshop, which is really nice. There's a lot of toing and froing as well, like people adding in things and just understanding, because the important thing to remember with these archetypes and everything, it's a person's point of view. And this is where it's funny when people get so set in their beliefs and stuff. It's like, it's just a point of view. Even if they're a professional or they've done some research, it's still a point of view. It's open for opinion, discussion, and application. So we'll break that down. That was really nice. And then Saturday morning, we wake up, meditate, get outside, did some movement outside in like a bit of qigong, a bit of just moving our bodies, sharing circle to start the day. I did a workshop on leading with love, which went down really well, really well. And in that talked about why it's so important that we lead with love in life. And then got into a bit of Buddhist philosophy, compassion, these kind of things. But that was a really it went surprisingly well, that one, because sometimes with a lot of this stuff, I speak from experience and from the stuff I've learned, and I'm generally sharing stuff that's resonated and that's landed with me, because they're my space. Like, I'm the person conducting the space. And the invite is for anyone to take what resonates and leave behind what doesn't, but just be open-minded enough to sit there, listen, and try and take it in without putting up barriers straight away. Let it sort of marinate and take away what you want. And then Ali West did a great workshop on lifestyle, and tackled mind, body, and spirit. A lot of what we do is mind, body, and spirit. So we did how to reduce stress, and looking at sort of implications in our lifestyle we can put in to reduce stress, such as meditation, cold water therapy, these kind of things. And then we did body, so movement, injury prevention and stuff like that. Again, why? Because if we're dealing with injuries, which most of us were, chronic pain damages your mental health, you know, it's all cyclical, it's all intertwined. And then spirit, we touched on journaling, so that was a fantastic workshop. Went out hiking in the afternoon. In the evening, I talked about more about polarity, so how we can apply the understanding of masculinity and femininity into relationships. Touched on a bit of tantra and sacred sex, and understanding the relationship to our cocks and to women's yonis, and understanding how that works, just in brief. But it's really important to understand all of this stuff and to be able to talk about sex and not giggling like little boys. That's part of being a mature man, is being able to say cock without giggling. So we did that in the evening, and then Sunday morning we did again the meditation, but I led a cacao ceremony, which was really beautiful. And we did a bit of a journey, a guided meditation, like quite a long one, and did a bit of inner child work there, which was really, really powerful. I think landed with some men, other men not so much, but everyone took part in it, and it was an experience ultimately. And then just to finish up the weekend, I spoke about mindset, and me and Ali helped the men just create a little takeaway list of what we're going to put into our lives and action. Right, what resonated? So guys, what landed with you from the weekend, and what do you want to then go and implement in your lives? And then we've just been checking in with them, seeing how we're getting on. So yeah, it was because it's important for me to give the knowledge and stuff, or to share the knowledge and facilitate these experiences. And that's the beauty of the retreats. You can really go in depth. It's like phones off. Put your phones in. We kept them in a Tupperware in the kitchen. Disconnect from social media and the rest of the world, and be very present, and let's dive deep and do the work. And what was beautiful, just being in that environment for a longer period of time, and like the conversations that happen between the workshops and on the hikes and stuff like that, and just this nice connection, which is really powerful. So yeah, looking forward to getting the next one in, hopefully September time. Hopefully going to get a bigger venue where we can have more men.
It looked really good, and it sounds exactly something up my street that I think there's a massive market there. I think it's obviously getting out of nature. You know, I love my hiking, psychology, love that. And I think it's so useful to have these kind of deep dives, essentially. You know, the men's circle's great because it's, 3 hours, we can talk about things, but you immerse yourself in that for a whole weekend. It's an investment in you. It's an investment in your psyche, and your lifestyle moving forwards from that, because there's going to be things that you can implement. Even if a lot of it doesn't land, it will probably be the fact that you really enjoyed being off your phone and being away from technology and being present with men, and just the whole experience of learning. Probably that's relatable to most people. So I know that you're also doing a mixed circle, which is interesting, because obviously my experience has just been the men's circle. So talk to me a little bit about what the goal is there. Why are you going from, I know that you're going to be continuing to do the men's circle, but why have you decided to do a mixed one?
Yeah, so it's funny, my first experience of sharing in circle was mixed. So my first sort of deep dive into this work is through meditation, mindfulness, Buddhist retreats, where we have circles, and it's normally more women than men on these things, as you've touched on. Women tend to do the work more than men, or more open to this stuff, because they don't have what we've discussed, all these blocks imposing them. So yeah, that was sort of my initial start into this. And my partner works with women, does very similar to what I do, but with women, empowering women, getting them to sort of take ownership of their bodies, of their life. And yeah, it's just a great opportunity. We're like, this is needed. And it's interesting talking, I think, through me listening to the men in the group and through stuff I talk on polarity, and often I relate things to myself, my own lived experience, and a lot of this stuff, masculinity and femininity, are playing out obviously in my relationship, and looking at that journey, but then also understanding like these tools for holding space and understanding the other side of it, because it's great if we're going to be like more mature, better, well-rounded men, and going to be for better service for our families and society, then we need to understand the feminine, this thing that we've suppressed for so long. We need greater understanding to as much as possible. And if we can't understand, we need to accept and allow, which a lot of the feminine is accepting and allowing, and making things safe for them to be in their feminine. So yeah, I mean, my partner are like, right, this is needed. We need to get them together. And especially more to hear the stories. I've, over the last 18 months, gotten into spoken word. So performing poetry, basically. And in that environment, I've heard shared a lot of female experiences of domestic violence, abuse, all of this stuff, and it's shocking. And most women, like people very, very close to me, have experienced violence at the hands of men. So that's why it makes me passionate to do men's work anyway, because we need to take ownership of this and responsibility and step up to be better lights in the world and lead by example. But also, I think it's going to be healing for both men and women to hear that the other side, hear their stories, certainly for women to see men who are taking conscious steps and responsibility for their actions, and men understanding how their actions. So when I talk about mindful speech and watching what we say and how we act, and men are sort of might laugh or belittle it or not acknowledge it and be like, you're just being a bit too spiritual or hippie or whatever. So, okay, right. Listen to these women and listen to how every time you do this action, how that impacts them. So it brings more awareness, right? I mean, it brings more understanding. And as well as creating a space where it would be interesting to see, I think you're coming to the mixed circle. It'd be interesting to see some of the men, just see how it is with the mix. Do they act any differently? Do they share more or do they share less? You know, how does that dynamic work when we throw in women and just everyone in the mix?
I think initially there probably will be a difference. Not massively, but I think from a subconscious level, I think there'll be it'll be interesting to see, because I said to you as well, like I was very intrigued to see how it goes, because I think it'll be great. I think it'll be beautiful and needed. But I do think that even from just a personal point of view, there's that kind of like, oh, well, now I've got to potentially share in front of female strangers. Like I got used to the male stranger part, like, and obviously we're all on the same path. And yes, logically, we're all collectively on the same path in this circle. But now there's that kind of that toxic masculinity creeping back in. You know, I've got to be vulnerable now in front of females. I've got to be vulnerable in front of a not just one. Like, yeah, that's fine. Like in a relationship, I could totally do that. I can be vulnerable, but can I be vulnerable in front of 10 complete female strangers?
Yeah,
that's interesting to unpick, because I think that even though I'm nowhere near enlightened, air quotes, but I feel like I've been doing the work for a while now, you know, and I could still catch these kind of toxic masculinity or limited beliefs within myself. So it's going to be very interesting just from a personal point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to find it interesting holding space for women as well. Because nothing's going to highlight any insecurities or underlying shadows that you haven't tackled than being put in that position and being vulnerable. But I think this is the thing with doing the work, and with the men's circles especially, a big thing that I'm trying to do by bringing these spaces together is show men that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's in fact a massive strength, huge strength, to be able to hold yourself with that strength and that love and that compassion, to be able to be vulnerable. It's incredibly empowering. There's this the toxic masculinity would say being vulnerable is a weakness. And then when you break that down, it's like, okay, so what if being vulnerable and expressing emotion is weak, what is strength? Is strength bottling up everything, bottling your emotions, suppressing until you lash out, you get drunk, you beat your wife, you get in a pub? Is that strong? It doesn't sound very strong to me. So it's actually understanding that by owning your emotions, there's a huge amount of strength in that, because it's taking responsibility and it's saying, actually, I'm confident enough in myself to be like, I'm having a shit time and I feel like crying and I'm going to do that. Great. It's not saying that you need to cry when you're sad. That's not a thing either. It's like, just because you're angry doesn't mean you have to raise your voice and lash out. Any of those things done in the right way are perfectly acceptable, but it's making sure you allow yourself to feel the emotions and learn how to express them in a healthy way.
Oh, I love that. I'm really looking forward to it. By the time this episode comes out, we will have done the first mixed circle, so it'll be interesting. We'll have to revisit it once it's been done.
Yeah.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. Before we end there, is there anything that you haven't talked about that you would like to mention?
Just in terms of with like men's circles and all of this stuff, like, be courageous and take a step out, give it a chance, have a growth mindset and step out your comfort zone. Try not to prejudge. There's often, I know when I first went on it, there's this narrative, I'm not gonna, like when I went on a Buddhist retreat, I'm gonna feel really uncomfortable because I'm not gonna be hippie enough, I'm not gonna be this, and I'm not gonna be that. Try and take these expectations and prejudgments away and go and just see what it's about, because the men we get out of circles, I would challenge anyone, just come down open-minded, and you will, if you've got any negative preconceptions about men getting around a fire and talking about their feelings, we'll probably smash them by you coming down to one of our men's circles, because they're really powerful spaces and transformative. And whether it's if you can't get down to one of mine, we're in Derbyshire, try and find one local to you. And again, if you don't like the first one, go find another one. Like, everyone facilitates differently, they're all packaged differently. Find one that fits, but you'll find so much growth in acceptance, responsibility for your life, and then finding community and support, whether that is in men's circles or finding a coach or going on a retreat. These are all tools that can really improve your life massively. So
amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. And finally, where can people find a little bit more about you?
So I'm on Instagram mainly, at Make Ready Men or at Make Ready Daniel. And my website is at Make Ready Mindset or at Make Ready Men. So you can subscribe on there, and all new retreats and circles and everything, podcasts eventually when I get my head around editing again. So yeah, on those platforms.
Perfect. Thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll link them down below in the description. Daniel, thank you for sharing your time with me. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I genuinely can't wait to get you back on. I'd love to deep dive anything really, but I think that was a beautiful introduction, and I think there's lots for people to take away there. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.